against certain losses in local revenue.
The chair recognizes Mr. Meyer to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Senate Bill 4 will increase Texas school district homestead exemption to a record $140,000 for over 5.7 million homeowners across the state. Last session, we passed the largest tax cut in Texas history, which included an increase to the current $100,000 homestead exemption, which was approved by 83% of our voters. SB4 builds upon this by ensuring our state's surplus is returned to our constituents. This bill passed the Senate unanimously, 31-0, and it would begin applying in this tax year of 2025, and I do have an amendment.
The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Meyer.
Chair recognizes Mr. Meyer to explain the amendment.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, after speaking with many school districts, as well as many of you in this room, we have listened, and we wanted to make sure that your school districts were, in fact, held harmless. So to address those concerns, by ensuring this increase in the homestead exemption does not negatively impact your ISDs. So specifically, hopefully the amendment is up and for you. First, in section 1.02 of the bill, we move the date of eligible debt service to be held harmless from January 1, 2025 to September 1, 2025. This means that if your school district passed a bond measure this May, it will be held harmless. Second, in section 2.03 of the bill, we ensure that any compression is held harmless beginning with the 2023-2024 school year and beyond, instead of limiting it to just the 2023 to 2025 school years. And Mr. Wally?
I'll wait.
Okay. And with that, I move adoption.
Mr. Anchia, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for just a few questions, please?
Will the gentleman yield
I will.
for questions? The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Chairman Meyer. Appreciate you bringing this bill to the floor. Dallas ISD had expressed some concerns during the last few days. I apologize, I just didn't get around to visiting with you about it. Will the hold harmless provision prevent Dallas ISD from losing $68 million next year and another $68 million the year after? Is that
That's
the effect of your amendment?
Yes, Chairman Chia, that is the effect. We want to make sure school districts are in fact held harmless.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Meyer sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. However, a record vote has been requested. A record vote is granted. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Dean voting aye. Have all voted? Have all voted? There being 142 ayes, 0 nays, the amendment is adopted. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Olcott.
The chair recognizes Mr. Olcott to explain the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, there's probably no other issue that I get more phone calls and emails about except for property tax relief. It's something that I hear about every single day. When I ran for office, other than the border, property tax relief is the promise that I made to my constituents. And I'm just disappointed in the amount of property tax relief that we're going to be giving to our citizens of this great state. And I have a very simple amendment that increases the personal homestead exemption from $140,000 to $160,000. I move adoption.
Mr. Bryant, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for question?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I do.
The gentleman yields.
Mr. Olcott, Mr. Meyer offered an amendment earlier to make sure our school districts were protected from the $140,000 exemption. And in my case, if he hadn't offered that amendment, it would have cost my district $68 million a year. Does Mr. Meyer's amendment also pay for the extra $20,000 exemption that you're adding? Or is it going to come out of the height of our school districts?
I'm not advised. It will.
Well, without that answer, how?
Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
And where did you get that answer? I want to be sure the answer is authoritative and accurate. It's critical that every one of our districts.
All his amendment did, from what I understand, is change the date.
Excuse me?
From what I understand, all his amendment did was to change the date.
Well, I think we're going to have to ask him about that. I would hope members would withhold judgment on your amendment until we find out if it's going to be paid for or if it's going to come out of our school districts.
So I'm looking at the amendment right now. It looks like it just changes the date. And you're welcome to look at the amendment that's already been offered.
I would have to say, and I hope you would agree.
His hold harmless amendment does not talk about the amounts. It only refers to the date.
Well, no, but the question is, what effect does his amendment have? Not the specific words. Does his amendment have the effect of covering, paying for out of state funds the additional exemption you're adding, or is it going to come out of our school districts? Is the question. And without the
State funds.
without a valid answer to that, a reliable answer to that, I hope members will withhold judgment until we get that answer.
My amendment simply changes the amount. It doesn't change anything else.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Gervin-Huggins, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for questions?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I will.
The gentleman yields.
We all want property tax relief for our citizens.
Yes, ma'am.
But have you done an actuarial review of what this additional amount, how it will impact our cities and our counties?
No, man, I have not done an actual review. All I know is that we have more than a $24 billion surplus in sales tax revenue, and I think more of it needs to be going to provide property tax relief to our citizens who are struggling every year to make their payments.
And I appreciate that, sir. But let's get away from the hyperbole and let's talk about real numbers that start impacting our other taxing entities the more we continue to rise this up. So there is no numbers that you've calculated. You just come and say, I want to raise what's already in the bill, correct?
I'm here simply to ask for the personal homestead exemption to be increased from $140,000 to $160,000. It's that simple.
Thanks for clarifying. So there is no numbers that we know right now that will tell us the impact. Thank you.
I move passage.
The chair recognizes Mr. Meyer in opposition.
Members, I move to table this amendment. As I've discussed, as I've done this for my third session, being chair of Ways and Means whenever we do property tax relief, this is a tightly negotiated relief package that we have worked with the governor, lieutenant governor, Senator Betancourt, speaker, myself, to land at this number. This is the amount of money that we have for property tax relief. And so, Mr. Alcott probably can't even tell you how much that costs, so we don't know where that money would come from. And so we need to stick to what has been agreed to with the Senate and the governor, and providing almost $10 billion in property tax relief. This is one part of it. And so for those reasons, I move to table the amendment.
Just one.
Mr. Wally, for what purpose?
Just gentleman yield for
Will the
just
gentleman
a
yield for questions?
few questions, clarifications.
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
Chairman Meyer, this amendment, although in its face looks like it's something would be positive for homeowners, there's no way to pay for that amendment, that extra $20,000. Is that my understanding?
Correct. And I don't know what that would do to the rest of the budget. I don't know what that would do to the additional property tax relief. Correct. We don't know where that money would come from.
Right, and so you talked about the budget. Right now, as we're finalizing budget negotiations between both chambers, we landed at a number for property tax relief. Is that my understanding as well?
Yes, we did. That's correct, Representative.
Okay, and so if we adopt this amendment, we would have to cut other parts of the budget to pay for this part of the budget. Is that how I understand
Absolutely,
it?
absolutely and unequivocally correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Collier, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for
Will the
questions?
gentleman yield for questions?
I will yield.
The gentleman yields.
Chair Meyer, just to follow along Chair Wally's questioning, if this were to pass, it would not be funded and therefore would not be implemented because the budget is just about done and this has not been accounted for. In fact, wouldn't you agree that there was opportunities to present this type of amendment to the budget to ensure that it was included so that way we can all give it careful consideration?
That's absolutely correct. There were opportunities throughout the entire budget process this could have been addressed, and it wasn't.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Mr.
Gentleman yield.
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Speaker Harris. Thank you, Chair Meyer. Let's be clear. Mr. Speaker, can I get some order, please?
Members, please take your conversations outside the rail.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chair Meyer, Bureau on Ways and Means, you chair Ways and Means.
That's correct.
That's a big committee.
Yes.
There are 13 members.
Correct.
Everybody works hard on that committee.
Yes, sir.
This number, this idea, this is not novel. This is pretty easy to come up with a number.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, is it easy to pay for it?
No.
It's not. And that is what we do every single day in that committee is wrestle with good ideas and then check the bank account to see if we can cash the check. That's what we do, right?
That is correct. We work very closely with appropriations to make sure we can pay for whatever we put out there.
So anybody who votes to table, they're not against cutting property taxes because we're about to cut them again. Is that right?
That's right.
And anybody who moves the table is really moving the table because we are doing these tax cuts within our means?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'll be joining you in the motion to table, and I ask that everybody vote to table.
Thank you.
Mr. Turner, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, with the gentleman yield.
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you, Chairman Meyer. So we're talking about the homestead exemption and what the right number is. I just wanted to kind of review what the legislature has done on the homestead exemption, say over the last decade. If my memory serves, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 10 years ago, wasn't the homestead exemption in Texas like $15,000?
That is correct.
And then several years ago, we increased it to, I think, $40,000.
That's correct.
And then 2 years ago, we increased it to $100,000.
Yes, that's correct.
And the measure you have before us now, SB4, and the upcoming SJR, is going to increase that to $140,000.
That is correct.
So in 10 years, the legislature, on a bipartisan basis, has taken the homestead exemption from $15,000 to, by the end of today, hopefully, $140,000. Is that right?
That is correct.
That is a substantial commitment to homeowners of Texas. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely agree.
And as you just discussed with Vice Chair Martinez-Fisher, it's easy to come up with a number, and we'd all like it to be as high as possible. But ultimately, the books have to balance, right? That's how we
Absolutely correct.
we have a balanced budget in the state of Texas.
Absolutely
don't we?
correct. I have no doubt that every member in this chamber wants to provide as much property tax relief as we possibly can, but also that we can afford.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll be supporting the motion to take.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Money, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for
Will the
questions?
gentleman yield for questions?
I will.
Gentleman yields.
Would you explain the total amount of property tax relief that's in not just this bill, but the package that we're being discussed today?
Sure. We have almost $10 billion in total property tax relief, with the business personal property tax increase to $125,000 that we concurred and voted out. Yesterday, we have the homestead exemption. We have this bill, which increases it to $140,000 for all homeowners, and then the next bill that will be on the floor will increase the homestead exemption for those over the age of 65 and those that are disabled to $200,000. And then we also do have compression that was triggered from last session's legislation that is in the amount of about $3 billion or 6.8 cents. So comprehensively, we have about $10 billion in property tax relief total this session.
And how much is that? How much of that is new relief this session that wasn't approved in previous sessions?
$6 to $6.5 billion, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay, so I think the frustration, I'm sure, of you and your constituents and me and my constituents and Mr. Olcott and his constituents and everybody here is not necessarily how we're dividing the pie, but that they want a bigger piece of property tax relief. Do you think that's fair?
No, I think every member in this chamber, I think every senator across that hall, all wants to provide as much property tax relief as we possibly can.
And trying to keep it to this bill is about how we're going to deliver that property tax relief, whether from compression, business personal property taxes, homestead exemption, and that's the part you negotiated, correct?
That is correct.
But in order for us to actually give more property tax relief, we would have to cut spending. Is that correct? Because there's no more money to give except for money that we've either spent ourselves or we give back to the property tax owners.
No, we're providing as much property tax relief as we can within the confines of our budget.
A budget that spent a huge portion of the surplus that we had on other things other than property tax relief.
We have an infrastructure to pay for. We have public education to pay for. We certainly do. And we also have money to allocate towards property tax relief, which is what we're doing here.
So if we were to increase the property tax relief as this amendment tries to do you know how much that would cost?
No, and nor does the amendment author.
Okay, but it would have to come from either the rainy day fund or surplus, or we would have to cut spending somewhere else in order to find that money.
Mr. Money, I don't know where that money would come from.
Okay.
And again, neither does the amendment author.
And that's not even really the job of Ways and Means. The job of Ways and Means is to figure out how to deliver the property tax or how to set property taxes appropriately. Is that correct?
To cut property tax relief and provide property tax relief, that is part of the job of Ways and Means, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Troxclair, for what purpose?
Does the gentleman yield?
Will the gentleman yield for questions? The gentleman yields.
So can you remind me, does a state levy a property tax on homeowners?
No.
Who can levy a property tax on homeowners?
Local municipalities.
So cities, counties,
Correct.
School districts, special purpose districts, MUDs, the list goes on and on.
That's correct.
So therefore, if our constituents in Texas want lower property taxes, who should they be talking to?
Definitely speaking to their local municipalities, counties as well, for sure.
So the only people who can raise property taxes or levy a property tax at all are our local taxing entities, while the state does not levy one at all. And the only thing that we can do is try our best to use our surplus from our thriving economy and sales taxes to buy down those property taxes, right?
That's correct, or exempt, or yes, of course.
And for those of us who have been passionate about homestead exemptions, passionate about lowering property taxes, I think you will share in my frustration that even though we have $51 billion in our state budget this year to reduce property taxes, that will get eaten up if we do not have responsible actors at the local governments who are keeping their taxes low on the residents that they serve.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. So this amendment can only do so much. Without the other guardrails and without local constituents paying attention to their local representatives, all we can do is put $51 billion to property tax relief and hope that that ultimately gets to Texans.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Ladies, the gentleman's time has expired.
I move to table the amendment.
The chair recognizes Mr. Olcott to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, we started off this session, we were informed by the comptroller that we had a $24 billion surplus that belongs to the taxpayer. And you just heard Chairman Meyer, who's worked tirelessly to put something in front of us, but we heard in a meeting with him back in maybe January or February in a Republican caucus meeting that we were only going to get a $6.5 billion in new appropriated money. Now we're hearing about $10 billion, but I think $3.5 billion of that comes from previously appropriated money from the previous session or maybe back in 2019. But the bottom line is, members, we have a $24 billion surplus.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Toth, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield?
Will the gentleman yield for
Just a
questions?
minute.
Not at this
We have a
time.
$24 billion surplus, and I refuse to go back to my district and say the best we can do is $6.5 billion in newly appropriated money from that $24 billion. And so my amendment will allow for a greater amount of that money, that $24 billion, to be used for property tax relief, and I think we need to support this. That's why I'm here. Yes,
Mr.
I'll
Speaker.
yield at this time.
Mr. Toth, for
Will
what
the
purpose?
gentleman yield?
Will the
Yes,
gentleman
sir.
yield for questions? The gentleman yields.
In light of the last questions that came from the back mic, what has the state of Texas done to rein in local governments from increasing spending, which inadvertently increases our taxes? What did we do this session to rein in local governments to keep them from spending more money?
I'm not sure if we did anything this session. I know we made some attempts on some previous sessions, but it doesn't seem to be working because despite those efforts in previous sessions, people's property taxes are still going through the roof.
Mr.
And we've got to
Alcott,
do more.
A lot of what drives the tax rate at the local level is debt. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
What did
Especially
we
at the
do?
INS level.
What did we do to move these debt obligations votes from May to November? Did this body do anything to force local governments to move debt obligation votes from May to November?
I'm not aware of that. I do know that I had a bill that would
We did
increase the
nothing.
threshold for bond issuance to 60% approval, but it never moved out of committee.
We would like to blame local governments, but local governments are a subdivision of the state of Texas, are they not?
They are.
Correct. And we have done nothing this session to rein in local government spending. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Thank
and we
you.
should have. I move passage. I vote no to table.
Mr. Olcott sends up an amendment. Mr. Meyer moves to table. The question is on the motion to table. If you're in favor of the amendment, vote no on the motion to table. If you're opposed to the amendment, vote yes on the motion to table. A record vote has been requested. Strict enforcement has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Members, I'll give you time to get to your desk. Have all voted? There being 96 ayes, 35 nays, the motion to table prevails. Please excuse Representatives Bernal, Ashby, and Dr. Buckley because of important business on a motion of Mr. Lambert. Is there objection? The chair has none, so ordered. Does anyone wish to speak on, for, or against Senate Bill 4? Mr. Wiley, for what purpose?
I'll wait for Chairman.
The chair recognizes Mr. Harrison to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I am going to vote for this bill, But I think it is critically important that we as a body be honest to our constituents about what this bill does, and perhaps more importantly, what the bill does not do. And let's go back to the basics for just a second. Never-ending property taxes are unethical, they're immoral, they should be thrown on the dust heap of history in the state of Texas. They are inconsistent with private property rights, and they prevent any Texan from ever truly owning their home in this state. You may call yourself a homeowner in the state of Texas, but the reality is you are just a renter and the government is your landlord. And if you don't believe me, try not paying your property tax bill at the end of the year and you will find out real fast who really owns your home in this state. Texans are being taxed out of their homes, and if there was only one thing that they demanded that we do this session, it was deal with property taxes and debate and pass bills to eliminate property taxes in Texas. And even if not full elimination, to at least fight for real property tax cuts right now and for everybody. And if we can't even do that, we should at least stop the property tax increases. The bills today unequivocally do not measure up to those expectations. We are failing at a time when it would have been, ironically, the easiest for us to succeed. We started this session with a $24 billion surplus, but instead of using that to put us on a path to eliminate property taxes, we lit it on fire to fund every liberal pet project imaginable.
Mr. Speaker, gentlemen, you have a question?
Not at this time.
Not at this time.
As for the good in this bill, and I want to speak to that, this bill may help some homeowners with their property tax bill. Maybe, and only some. But unfortunately, it is entirely conceivable that many or most homeowners and property owners will not see any real savings at all because the appraisals are likely to increase and eat up this new exemption. And even if the appraisals don't go up by the full amount of the exemption, the legislature is still authorizing political subdivisions to increase property tax rates. And that's where things do get bad for this bill. Because by only increasing exemptions, it actually puts inflationary pressure on property tax rates. And we should be doing everything we can as a body to get the property tax rates as close to zero as is possible. And worse, we're putting inflationary pressure on tax rates by picking winners and losers. And while it may help some homeowners, it will almost certainly harm small business owners, entrepreneurs, brick and mortar stores, which will force them to increase their prices, and renters. Members, all Texans deserve tax relief. And one myth about property taxes that needs to be put to bed, and that's that the state of Texas does not levy property taxes. Austin politicians want to absolve themselves of blame by pointing the finger at local governments. And yes, the local governments absolutely share in some of the blame here. But it is factually not true to say that the state of Texas is not responsible for property tax increases. I apparently have to continuously remind this body that local governments are political subdivisions of what? They're political subdivisions of the state. So when local governments raise property taxes, it is the state of Texas that is raising those property taxes. And ultimately, when property taxes go up, the real people responsible for that property tax, those property tax increases, are those of us in this room here today. Another myth that here's another myth that I really love hearing. All property tax increases are voter approved. This is an absolute lie. The vast majority of property tax increases happen without voter approval, and why is that? That is because this body explicitly allows it. And unfortunately, this bill does not change that. I've been pushing a bill for years to make all property tax increases illegal unless they were approved by voters in an election. Ladies and gentlemen, that would be the lowest of all possible low-hanging fruit. And yet, this body continues to refuse to do that, unfortunately, including even in this bill. So, in closing, I'm going to vote for this bill, but not because it is a great bill that really fixes property taxes in Texas, but because it appears that this is the best that we are going to get this session. And that is just a pathetic and sad indictment of this body over the past 5 months. By failing to deal with property taxes head on with the seriousness that issue deserves, we continue to fail the hardworking and overtaxed men and women of the great state of Texas. Guys, Texas has a reputation for leading in freedom and liberty and small government and low taxes, but the reality is that Texas has one of the highest property tax burdens in America, and we have just been coasting on our small government reputation. It is past time we start living up to it. Texans deserve better.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will happily
The
yield
gentleman
for
yields.
any
Thank
and
you,
all
Mr. Speaker.
questions.
Representative Harrison, are you done making your video?
are you here to help me highlight for 30 million Texans the abject failure of this body to rein in their out-of-control property taxes that are taxing Texans out of their home on a daily basis?
Let's talk about
That's
that.
what I would like. I would like to talk about property taxes.
Let's talk about that. So
Let's talk about it.
you talk a big game about wanting to cut taxes and cut spending. That happens to be the department that I'm in Ways and Means.
You mean the
What
committee?
what
you mean
bill
the-
did you file in Ways and Means to take up this rhetoric that you're spewing from the front mic?
I filed no less than 5 property tax bills, and I can't help where the leadership of this body sends or refers those bills, or who in leadership made the decision to kill
Did
all
you
of
ask
them.
for hearings? I never saw you in a hearing.
Every single one of them. And in fact,
Members, please confine your remarks to the subject of the
every
bill.
single one of them. And in fact, 2 of them were designated as emergency items months ago. My bill that would have made all property tax increases illegal unless they were approved
Members,
by
please
voters in an election.
confine your remarks to the subject of the bill.
And so you recognize that a lot of this work is cutting taxes. You say that some people will benefit from this. We're talking about tax homestead exemptions that will exceed the value of people's homes. They'll pay no taxes. You're aware of that, aren't you?
And I think you must be unaware of the comments that I just made that you're asking questions me about, because I said I plan to vote for the bill.
Well, you said
But
that.
I said that 2 times in my remarks, and here's the reality. Just because the bill does some good, and it does do some good, as I clearly laid out in my remarks, my broader point is that this is nowhere near sufficient to tackle the crushing burden of property taxes in the state of Texas.
Right, and maybe if you can put a bill on the floor, we can talk about that. But
I
we
have put at least
we
5
have
bills to do that in the
SB4.
process, but the leadership of this body has refused to let a single one of my bills to end property taxes get to the floor of this body.
Members, confine your remarks to the subject of the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I think you just mean member, not members. I'm trying to keep my remarks to the subject of this bill.
You
I
are
can't
the person
control
that
the
has raised
responses.
every one of my 5 property tax bills. I have not brought a single one of them up. You brought every one of them up.
And
every one
so
of them.
you're voting for this bill.
I have said that
You're
at
happy
least
with this
3
tax
times
cut?
now. No,
Well, then you should vote no.
that's not true. I am going to take the small little bitty gain that this bill may represent. And if you had heard any of my remarks, you would have understood that. But simply because there are a handful of homeowners that might benefit from this bill, that does not mean that this bill is sufficiently satisfactory to tackle the biggest issue that we've got,
And
that
that's
our
where
constituents are facing.
That's where we disagree. I don't think it's just a handful of tax owners. Do you?
I know that it is, because we've got 30 million Texans. We're talking about a $40,000 increase in the exemption. I know that political subdivisions all across the state are going to increase the appraisals by $40,000 or more, and I know that this body allows, even with those increased appraisals, to raise the effective tax rate by 2.5% to 3.5%.
And I don't
so I
wanna-
know for a fact that many Texans will see their property tax bills increase
Right,
at
and
the
I
end of
don't
this
want to.
session.
I don't want to insult your intelligence. I know you read this bill. This is not an appraisal bill. You know that, right?
I'm very well aware
Okay,
of
you're
that
aware
fact,
of that,
yeah.
and you know that you've been admonished 3 times to talk about this bill. This is a tax
You
cut
were
bill.
admonished for raising bills that were not before the body.
And so, I'm not here to talk about appraisals. I'm not here to talk about
You're the one talking
local
about appraisals
spend.
and asking me questions about appraisals, aren't
I'm
you?
here to talk about the handful of people you think will benefit from this tax cut.
I explained them in
And I
my
will submit
remarks.
to you
A handful of homesteaders may realize a small benefit. I have said that at least 4 times now. Are you having trouble hearing me, Representative?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, listen, I think what you do is undermine this process, how hard people work. It is not hard to come up with a number. It's hard to pay for a number. It's easy to make speeches. And this benefit in the area where I come from, maybe I don't live in the upscale neighborhoods of your district. The district that I represent that sends me up here.
I don't think you are familiar with very familiar with Ellis County, Representative.
Well, I will tell you, for many families in Bexar County, where I come from, they will benefit significantly from this homestead exemption, and the bill to follow will add even more for the older Texans that are here.
And I wish you shared the enthusiasm you do for the small number of Texans that this bill might possibly help, and channel that enthusiasm into helping every one of the 30 million Texans who are having their lives ravaged by out-of-control property taxes in the state of Texas.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes Mr. Meyer to close on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Member, this bill does in fact help millions of Texans with their property tax burden. We have worked very hard. As I said, I wanted to thank the governor, lieutenant governor, the speaker, Senator Betancourt for having us come to this agreement, having us come to this deal, and having this be one part of our property tax relief legislation that we're going to deliver to millions of Texans this session.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wally, for what purpose?
would Chairman Meyer just yield for a few
The
questions?
gentleman yield for questions.
I will.
The gentleman yields.
Chairman Meyer, y'all been working on this for months this session. Is that my understanding?
That is correct.
Okay. And you've had negotiations with obviously both chambers, the Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, to get to a point where we found a more equitable method of property tax relief. Is that my understanding?
Correct.
And this type of homestead exemption distributes the savings fairly amongst households. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
Okay. Am I correct that about 2 out of 3 Texas households own a home?
That is correct.
Okay, and so that savings will be, this exemption and those savings will be realized by real homeowners equally from middle income folks, and those are the folks that frankly I care about, lower and moderate income folks in my district. This would be a savings for them as well. Is that my understanding?
That is correct.
Okay, and I think Chairman Turner mentioned that over the years we've had a series of escalations progressively of raising the homestead exemption because that's the most, as mentioned, equitable way to get relief for homeowners. Correct.
It is an equitable way for sure.
Just to flesh out again, this homestead exemption goes from $100,000 to $140,000. But you also have the subsequent constitutional amendment, SJR 2. I know we're not on it, but you need both of those together for this thing to work. Is that correct?
We absolutely do.
Okay. And the state is going to provide, my numbers have $2.7 billion to offset the revenue loss to school districts from the increased exemption.
That's correct.
To SB4, correct?
That's correct.
And then SB4 also adjusts the property tax freeze for Texans who are over 65 or disabled to ensure these groups also benefit from this increased exemption. Is that?
Mr. Wally, that would be the next bill, SB23.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we got that on the record.
Yes, sir.
And in addition to that, the only other concern that I have is also for renters, right? And you and I have had this over the last couple of sessions. Some relief for renters, right? Because a lot of renters indirectly pay a property tax by their monthly payments. That would be my only caution, and to get that on the record, that we need to continue to look at renters, those folks that are working shift jobs that may not have enough yet to save up for a home yet, and they're wanting to, but they're in an apartment or they're leasing a place. I just want to make sure I get that on the record that we also need to continue to look at renters and how we can help them as well, because they're taxpayers as well, whether indirectly or through sales tax.
Absolutely. Mr. Wally, you have been a fantastic advocate for the renters for my 6 years of being chairman of Ways and Means, and I continue to look forward to working with you to help address their concerns as well.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the time this day. It's a big bill, so I'm glad we fleshed this out a little bit more. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Hinojosa, for what
will the
purpose?
gentleman yield for
The
questions?
gentleman yield for questions.
Yes.
The gentleman yields.
Representative Meyer, I intend to vote for your bill. I know my constituents are eager for property tax reduction, just like yours. I am hearing from school districts now during this debate with continued concern about the impact this might have on our efforts in House Bill 2, which you and I know still hasn't passed the Senate. You offered an amendment. We voted that amendment that is supposed to fix any problem. If there is still a hit to our school districts with this bill, and we figure that out, are you committed to working to make sure that we actually hold harmless our school districts through this legislation?
I'm happy to continue to have conversations to protect our school districts. That was, of course, the intent and the effect of that amendment was to do just that. So I'm obviously happy to continue those conversations.
Okay, I appreciate it because we all want property tax relief, but many of us cannot support doing it on the backs of our students in our neighborhood schools. And so I appreciate your willingness to work with us. Thank
Understood.
you.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Canales, for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for a few questions?
Gentleman yield for questions. Gentleman yields.
First, I want to thank you for your hard work. Property tax is one of the biggest issues that we deal with, not only at the breakfast table, but right here in this building. And I want to talk a little bit about what your bill doesn't do. And I'll be voting for it, by the way. But it doesn't affect the rate at which people are taxed, is it?
That's a local concern. Yes, sir.
Okay, so and it doesn't affect valuations or appraisals, does it?
That is correct. That is done at the appraisal board level.
So everybody I talk to says if we can't fix the rate, people are getting taxed out of their homes. This relief that you're talking about gives an exemption for homesteads. Is that correct?
Yes, this provides homestead exemption.
Up to what level?
Up to $140,000.
Now let me ask you, so I live in areas that have extremely impoverished areas that some of the houses, they're not worth $100,000. In fact, it's hard to find a house worth $140,000 in some of the areas. What happens to those districts where all those properties are now exempt and taken off, ostensibly taken off the tax roll?
Well, they'll still have other revenue generating property, and I would proffer to you that those that are under $100,000 probably don't provide that much in property taxes, although it's a lot. For them, for sure, there are other property generating over 140,000 properties within the districts.
So the answer is you're hoping there's other properties over 140,000.
The answer is I'm providing $140,000
in relief. That's my question is, so that value is exempt, and so it's not taxed. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I'll phrase my question as best I can. I'll give you. I've got a town in my district that I can't find a house worth 140,000 that are exempt. What happens to their revenue for their school district since you've ostensibly taken those houses off the tax roll? And if
there's other property generating revenue within the district.
so, you're saying other commercial? Are you trying to say that there's going to be something that makes up for it?
I'm just saying that first off, I don't know specifically your district and where you're talking about.
Well,
so
I'll give you a hypothetical, and I'm not trying to trick you, but let's just say I've got a town that is very impoverished. They have a school district. They depend on these local taxes, and in that district, 95% of the houses are not even worth 140,000. So those come off the tax roll. What's left?
Mr. Canales, I can't speak to your hypothetical because I can't speak to that. I need to take a look at the property valuations and what they have within their district.
Do you recognize that could be a problem?
The state is still funding the schools, so this doesn't affect the funding for public education.
Okay. Well, I look forward to working with you because the reality is this. This is a Band-Aid. It's a good start. I believe that your efforts are laudable, they're noble, and I'm going to vote for your bill. But the underlying problems that exist with the property tax system, I'll echo some of what Representative Harrison, is the rate. And until this body does something about the rate, and I heard somebody say, well, the appraisals are out of hand. No, I'd love for my house to be appraised at the highest value. It's the rate at which you tax me. And until this body reins in the rates, we're going to tax people out of their homes.
And Mr. Canales, to that point, without getting into other legislation, we on the Ways and Means Committee in this body will be presented with that opportunity as the session continues.
Well, like I said, I appreciate you answering my questions,
Yes, sir.
and I really look forward to working with you for real meaningful relief. I think this is just a Band-Aid, and I'll take a Band-Aid when we're bleeding, but the reality is, if we really want to help people, we've got to work on the rate at which people are getting taxed out of, not the valuations. Everybody likes their home to be worth a lot. It's the rate, but thank you for
Mr. Canales,
appreciate you.
I absolutely agree with you as well.
Gentleman's time has expired.
You want an extension? I request an.
Mr. Verdell, for what purpose?
Could I request an extension?
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there objection? Chair hears none. Gentleman's time is extended.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Vidal, for what purpose?
Will the member yield for one question slash statement?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I will represent.
Gentleman yields.
Appreciate. I want to point out, because I know that I have some school members, school leadership that's watching this. In reflection to what Representative Canales had just said, I had a superintendent point out to me, because West Texas is a lot of my district, and they pointed out we took out. They said that we did bonds based on the 100,000 increase that we did on the exemption. They can pay back the bonds that they have at that 100,000. If you raise this to 140,000, they say they're going to be unable now to pay back the bonds for those. I just wanted to make that point so that it was on the record and on
For
video.
sure, but I think, and Mr. Riddell, I don't know specifically what your school district, but that was the amendment that I put onto this bill, was to address ISD concerns of such a nature, and I believe we have.
All right, thanks for pointing that out.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Weiner, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
I will.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you so much, Representative Meyer, and let me just start by saying thank you so much for the hold harmless language to make sure all our school districts are comfortable with this legislation. Representative Meyer, are you aware that I represent one of the areas with the fastest growth in property values in the state?
Yes, Representative, you and I have discussed that.
And so, Representative Meyer, knowing that, I just want to say thank you so much for offering this legislation that has exactly the kind of tax relief those fast property value growth areas are looking for. Thank you.
Representative.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. DeRazio, for what purpose?
would the representative take a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Meyer, in looking at this entire property tax situation that we're in order to get to the truth of any problem, you have to go back to the origin. Could you give us a historical count of where we started and how we got to where we are and how we got to the mess that we're in and how we can solve it?
Representative, you're probably going to need to be a little more specific as to your question.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I move passage.
The question occurs on passage to third reading of Senate Bill 4. This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mrs. Weiner voting aye. Show Mr. Martinez Fisher voting aye. Have all voted? Show. Have all voted? There being 145 ayes, 0 nays, Senate Bill 4 is passed to third reading. The chair recognizes Mr. Martinez Fisher for a recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm proud to recognize the Democratic